Hello, friends and neighbors, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. I thought I'd try and further a little bit more reading today with you, doing a little bit more on Hamlet if possible. I've got myself fortified here today with a bit of this stuff, the drop of the mother's milk, 2 gingers. It's a local distiller. Well, I suppose local is locally based in Ireland. I'll put the link in the description if you're interested at all. But they're locally Chicago, Illinois, Chicago distributors, and they're a product of Ireland, and so it's good stuff. So blended Irish whiskey, good stuff. I have been fascinated, riveted by a podcast that I highly recommend. I like to pass on to you all things that I'm going through, the Shakespeare 2020 project and the podcast of the history of the English language. And the 2 things that I want to pass your way today, just that you might find very interesting. One is Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. If you haven't yet checked out Dan Carlin, I really strongly urge you to do so. I'll put a link down below, but he has a number of free podcasts and asks for donation. But then he also has some, of course, merchandise that he sells and some podcasts that he sells to his higher-end contributors. But Supernova in the East, I just finished part 1 of Supernova in the East, and it's absolutely fascinating. Carlin has an amazing way of presenting material, so you don't even know that 2 hours of history have gone by. And he has, of course, his facts are all correct, but he has a great analysis and an insight into human nature and the human element that would drive people to do certain things. So in this series of 3 podcasts, Supernova in the East, he's actually looking at what would galvanize a society like the Japanese society to be so absolutely devastating as a military group during World War II. And it's well worth your time if you haven't already checked out Dan Carlin. So Dan Carlin's Supernova in the East from his Hardcore History series. I also recommend, and I haven't done this before, but I highly recommend that you check out Modern Jukebox. It's a great YouTube site where they take videos, music from the 80s and 90s, and they make videos of it. And it's done in a style of jazz. So I'll put the link for that too, but it's really a neat thing to check out. It's a postmodern jukebox. And some of the performances are just off the wall good. So I would highly recommend that you check that out. Last time we met and we got into Hamlet, I just delved right into Hamlet. I didn't have any notes or prepare anything at all. And this time around, I have a couple things up to share with you which are interesting about Hamlet. First, there's a really funny article from Slate magazine, which I'll pass on in the links, about whether or not Hamlet was actually fat, whether he was a fat character. And part of what the article points out is that the main actor who would have played Hamlet was rather corpulent. And it makes for an interesting idea, because most of the time we see Hamlet as this younger guy and thin and pensive and brooding. But it's highly possible that at least the first characters, Hamlet, he was a rather large guy. So it bodes well for guys like me who are equally brooding and equally dour and equally pensive and equally inhibiting their girth. So if you're interested in that article, I'll put that in the link as well. Another thing that I found really interesting, I touched on this in the last video, but a friend of mine over at Facebook has brought up the idea that the play of Hamlet has very prominent Christian overtones, and certainly overtones of the Easter imagery. And I think there's a great deal to be said about that. I think that the Christian overtones for sure. The Easter overtones, I think, are there because I think that the whole play is about, it's a reflection on the resurrection and whether the resurrection is at all a reality, and whether there is an answer to this cycle of violence that otherwise humans are caught up in. And my pal over at Facebook has suggested that the opening lines where the guard says, "Who's there?" are a setting for the rest of the tone of the play, and they reflect the quem quaeritis of the church. The quem quaeritis, and I'll put a link about this as well. The quem quaeritis is Latin for "whom do you seek?" It's what the angels ask. First, the angels ask of Mary Magdalene when she goes to the tomb of Christ and finds it empty, and then later Christ asks that of her too. So, just reading here, it says the Latin question "quem quaeritis" refers to 4 lines of the medieval Easter liturgy that later formed the kernel of the large body of medieval liturgical drama, which is also known as Visitatio Sepulchri. It was introduced into the liturgy in the 10th century as a new genre of liturgical ceremony, interrogatio. Now, I think there's a great deal to be said about this. I think that the tradition of liturgical drama, which goes back to the roughly 1100s, was a primary way for people who were uneducated to get the stories of the gospel, the stories of the Christian faith. And I think it was what they would do is they'd take these little scenes out of the gospel and they dramatize them within the church, and then people who weren't able to read the text would actually know the stories because they would be seeing this drama of the event performed before them. And that was one way that people learned the stories of the gospel. The other major way was to see the imagery in the church, the stained glass windows and the statuary and the frescoes, so that people learned about the gospel stories in ways other than reading the text. So the quem quaeritis then is attributed as being, or is credited as being, the source from which not just liturgical drama, but Western drama originates in Europe, if I get that right. And consequently, I think that tradition, which continued all the way into the Baroque era and into the classical era, I think that tradition is well known to Shakespeare. And if he didn't intend a direct connection to the quem quaeritis, he certainly seems to have intended a direct connection to the Christian imagery that exists elsewhere in the play. Okay, if that makes sense. Right. Now, what do I mean by the trope on the resurrection? I think that the play is a reflection on this idea of the scholastic problem. Do our words have a connection to another world, or do our words not have a connection to the other world? If our words are merely constructs of our own mind that have been created in order to survive in this world, then they don't have a connection to anything otherworldly. And there is no otherworldly, and there is no heaven and hell, and there is no soul, and there is no afterlife at all. And perhaps there's no God. Excuse me for a minute. Andrew, will you shut the window, please? Okay, then could you stop being so loud, please?
Oh, wait a minute.
Thank you. Anyway, the Latin quem quaeritis then reflects this Easter idea that maybe the resurrection itself is not a reality, but rather just a story, merely a story. And if it is merely a story, the play seems to suggest, aren't we adrift in a world that is materialism only, where we are squirting juices, a bag of pus, a bag of muscle and blood attached to bones, where our material self has no otherworldliness, no beauty to it. And consequently, do we not begin to see the world as a trap, as a cage, as a place that is like a prison house? Or is that not, at least if it's not a necessity, is that not a possibility that we could begin to see that? And I think that Shakespeare's raising that issue. He's raising this problem of it's not necessarily atheism, it's nihilism, I guess you could say. That nothing is important anymore. Nothingness itself is all that we have left to us. Well, we certainly see that with Hamlet when he does his great to be or not to be speech later on. And we certainly see that when he talks about how Denmark is a prison, and how he talks about what a piece of work is man. And we'll get to those. So we see elements of that. And how is this all related to a resurrection? Well, if the resurrection was a reality, if it was a reality, then we can rely on the idea that our own lives have been connected to an otherworldliness that allows us to hope for something greater than this world. Spem in alium, right? Something greater than what we have in front of us. And if it is a reality, which is different from if it was a reality, if it is a reality, then our own sense of imprisonment and darkness and broodingness eventually comes to a point, or has to come to a point, where we accept that things are out of our hands, out of our control. And that resurrection occurs because we suddenly realize that the world's a bigger place than we thought before. Well, that being said, the Quem Quirites then does seem to set the tone for the rest of the play. And I'll put in links to what that trope was, especially in Shakespearean drama later on. Because it seems that some scholars suggest that it lasted as long, at least until Shakespeare's time. And certainly with the translation of the Bible into the King James, it would be a factor to consider. How is this play a resurrection play? And what does this play tell us about the problem of words and ideas? That's something I think to consider. And we'll consider it as we continue to read forwards in the play. The boys seem to be playing some sort of shooting game in the background, so if you have children, you feel my pain. Let's read a little bit in Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 2. Oh, and by the way, remember in the opening, Act 1, Scene 1, where the two guards were Bernardo and Francisco? I'm a big advocate for considering names in a work and what names mean. And I wonder about this. I wonder about the names that he chooses. I don't know whether or not he intends everything, but if we assume that he does intend everything, because the artist has control over a huge portion of what he actually does when he creates his play, if we assume that he intends it, then he's intending the names of the characters as much as he's intending the setting and the words that he chooses and the imagery that he's using, that he's employing. From what I read here in Wikipedia, which is a great source to go to, the tragedy of Hamlet by William Shakespeare is written in 1599, sometime between 1599 and 1601. So it's right at the height of his power. By this time, we'd had already the Council of Trent. We'd had the sack of Rome in 1524. We had the Reformation. We'd had the split from Rome by England and Henry VIII. We had Elizabeth's wars and her purges, and now we're into King James's rule in England. So we're already in that point where James is translating the Bible into English, where he's writing books about witches and demons. So it's an era where the idea of otherworldliness and whether there's anything beyond this world is a very important idea. It is also Shakespeare's longest play, 30,557 words, in case you're counting words. It is based apparently on Amleth, the legend of Amleth, which is preserved by 13th century chronicler Saxo Grammaticus in his Gesta Danorum. It's retold by 16th century scholar Francois de Belleforest. And he seems to have drawn also from an earlier Elizabethan play known as the Hamlet. Hamlet, I like that. Some scholars believe that Shakespeare wrote the Hamlet, later revising it to create the version of Hamlet we now have. So we'll go with the idea that the Hamlet was an earlier version. So, and then he revised it and made it even better. So here we are with Hamlet, and we are in Act 1, Scene 2. And remember that there has been this rumor of a ghost appearing. The ghost is Hamlet Sr., who seems to be appearing to on the battlements of the castle, and that the castle itself is already not under siege, but preparing for war because the Danes are threatening to invade. So we have a situation of intrigue and plot, and a very tense situation where the king has just recently died. And even that is suspect. Like, why would the king suddenly die when he was in good health? So, we enter in with Act 1, Scene 2. Hamlet appears in this scene for the first time, and one wonders about his state of mind. I love, by the way, I don't know about you, but I love seeing the action in the background, because you kind of get a Hamlet-like action in the background of the boys fighting each other with swords while I'm trying to read this greatest work of English literature by William Shakespeare. I think that's appropriate. I don't know. Maybe I'm just biased. Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 2. Flourish, and enter Claudius, the king of Denmark, Gertrude the queen, the council as Polonius, and his son Laertes, and then Hamlet with others, among them Voltimand and Cornelius. The king, Claudius, begins. Though yet of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory be green, and that it is us befitted to bear our hearts in grief, and our whole kingdom to be contracted in one brow of woe. Yet so far hath discretion fought with nature, that we with wisest sorrow think on him together with remembrance of ourselves. Therefore, our sometime sister, now our queen, the imperial jointress to this warlike state, have we, as 'twere with a defeated joy, with an auspicious and a dropping eye, with mirth and funeral, and with dirge and marriage, an equal scale weighing delight and dole, taken to wife. Nor have we herein barred your better wisdoms, which have freely gone with this fair along, for all our thanks. Now follows that you know. Young Fortinbras, holding a weak supposal of our worth, or thinking by our late dear brother's death our state to be disjointed and out of frame, colleagued with this dream of his advantage, he hath not failed to pester us with message importing the surrender of those lands lost by his father, with all bonds of law to our most valiant brother. So much for him. Now for ourselves, and for this time of meeting, thus much the business is. We have here writ to Norway, uncle of young Fortinbras, who, impotent and bedrid, scarcely hears of this his nephew's purpose, to suppress his further gait herein, in that the levies, the lists, and full proportions are all made out of his subject, and we here dispatch you, good Cornelius, and you, Voltimand, for bearers of this greeting to old Norway, giving to you no further personal power to business with the king, more than the scope of these dilated articles allow. Farewell, and let your haste commend your duty. Cornelius and Voltimand respond. In that, and in all things, will we show our duty. We doubted nothing. Heartily, farewell. And now, Laertes, what's the news with you? You told us of some suit. What is Laertes? You cannot speak of reason to the Dane and lose your voice. What wouldst thou beg, Laertes? That shall not be my offer, not thy asking. The head is not more native to the heart, the hand more instrumental to the mouth, than is the throne of Denmark to thy father. What wouldst thou have, Laertes? My dread lord, your leave and favour to return to France, from whence, though willingly I came to Denmark, to show my duty in your coronation. And now I must confess that duty done, my thoughts and wishes bend again toward France, and bow them to your gracious leave and pardon. Have you your father's love? What says Polonius?
He hath, my lord, wrung from me my slow leave by laboursome petition, and at last, upon his will, I sealed my heart content. I do beseech you, give him leave to go.
Take thy fair hour, Laertes. Time be thine, and thy best graces spend it at thy will. But now, my cousin, Hamlet, and my son, a little more than kin, and less than kind. How is it that the clouds still hang on you? Not so, my lord. I am too much in the sun. Good Hamlet, says the queen, cast thy nighted collar off, and let thine eye look like a friend on Denmark. Do not forever with thy veiled lids seek for thy noble father in the dust. Thou knowest 'tis common. All that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity.
Aye, madam. 'Tis common.
If it be, why seems it so particular with thee? Seems, madam?
Nay, it is.
I know not seems. 'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath, no, nor the fruitful river in the eye, nor the dejected behaviour of the visage, together with all forms, moods, shapes of grief, that can denote me truly. These indeed seem, for they are actions that a man might play. But I have that within, which passeth show. These but the trappings, and the suits of woe. 'Tis sweet and commendable in your nature, Hamlet, says the king, to give these morning duties to your father. But you must know, your father lost a father. That father lost his. And the survivor bound in filial obligation for some turn to do obsequious sorrow. But to persevere in obstinate condolement is a course of impious stubbornness. 'Tis unmanly grief. It shows a will most incorrect to heaven, a heart unfortified, a mind impatient, an understanding simple, and unschooled. For what we know must be and is as common as any the most vulgar thing to sense. Why should we, in our peevish opposition, take it to heart? Fie, 'tis a fault to heaven, a fault against the dead, a fault to nature, to reason most absurd, whose common theme is death of fathers, and who still hath cried from the first course till he that died today, this must be So, we pray you, throw to earth this unprevailing woe, and think of us as your father. And let the world take note, you are the most immediate to our throne, and with no less nobility of love than that which dearest father bears his son, do I impart toward you. For your intent, going back to school in Wittenberg, is most retrograde to our desire. And we beseech you, bend you, to remain here in the cheer and comfort of our eye. Our chiefest courtier, cousin, and our son. Let not my mother lose her prayers, Hamlet. I pray thee, stay with us. Go not to Wittenberg. I shall, says Hamlet, in all my best, obey you, madam. Why, 'tis a loving and a fair reply. Be as ourself in Denmark, madam. Come, this gentle and unforced accord of Hamlet sits smiling to my heart, in grace whereof no jocund health that Denmark drinks today, but the great cannon to the clouds shall tell, and the kings rouse the heavens shall bruit again, re-speaking earthly thunder. Come away. Flourish, and all but Hamlet exit. Oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. Or that the everlasting had not fixed his cannon against self-slaughter. God. How weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fine. 'Tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely, that it should come to this. But 2 months dead. Nay, not so much. Not 2. So excellent a king that was to this Hyperion, to a satyr, so loving to my mother that he might not beteem the winds of heaven, visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth. Must I remember? Why, she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on. And yet within a month. Let me not think on it. Frailty thy name is, woman. A little month. Or ere those shoes were old, with which she followed my poor father's body, like Niobe, all tears. Why, even she, God, be someone's discourse of reason would have mourned longer. Married with my uncle. my father's brother. But no more like my father than I to Hercules. Within a month, ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left the fleshing in her gullet eyes, she married. How must wicked speed to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets? It is not, nor it cannot come to good. But break my heart, for I must hold my tongue. Enter Horatio, Marcellus, and Bernardo. "Here to your lordship," says Horatio. "I'm glad to see you well." "Horatio? Why did I forget myself?" "The same, my lord. And your poor servant ever." "Sir, my good friend, I'll change that name with you. And what make you from Wittenberg, Horatio? Marcellus?" "My good lord," says Marcellus, "I am very glad to see you. Good evening, sir. But what in faith make you from Wittenberg?" "A truant disposition, my lord." "I would not hear your enemies say so," says Hamlet, "nor shall you do my ear that violence to make it truster of your own report against yourself. I know you are no truant." "But what is your affair in Elsinore?" "We'll teach you to drink deep, ere you despair, and depart." "My lord, I came to see your father's funeral." "I prithee do not mock me." "Fellow student, I think it was to see my mother's wedding." "Indeed, my lord, it followed hard upon." Thrift, Horatio! The funeral baked meats did coldly furnish forth the marriage tables. Would I had met my dearest foe in heaven, or ever I had seen that day. Horatio, my father. Methinks I see my father. "Where, my lord?" says Horatio. "In my mind's eye, Horatio." "I saw him once. He was a goodly king." "Ah, he was a man. Take him for all in all. I shall not look upon his like again." "My lord, I think I saw him yesternight." "Saw who?" "My lord, the king, your father." "The king? My father?" "Season your admiration for a while, with an attent ear, till I may deliver upon the witness of these gentlemen this marvel to you." "Well, for God's sake, let me hear." 2 nights together had these gentlemen, Marcellus and Bernardo, on their watch, in the dead waste and middle of the night, been thus encountered a figure, like your father, armed at point exactly capapae. He appears before them, and with solemn march goes slowly and stately to them. Thrice he walked by their oppressed and fear-surprised eyes. Within his truncheon's length, whilst they distilled almost to jelly with the act of fear, stand dumb and speak not to him. This, to me, in dreadful secrecy in part they did, and I, with them the 3rd night kept the watch, whereas they had delivered, both in time, form of the thing, each word made true and good, the apparition comes. I knew your father. These hands are not more like. But where was this? My lord, upon the platform where we watch. Did you not speak to it? My lord, I did, but answer made it none. Yet once, methought it lifted up its head, and it addressed itself to motion, like as it would speak. And even the morning cock crew loud, and at the sound it shrunk in haste away and vanished from our sight. 'Tis very strange. As I do live, my honor, lord, 'tis true, and we did think it writ down in our duty to let you know of it. Indeed, sirs, but this troubles me. Hold you the watch tonight? We do, my lord. Armed, say you? Armed, my lord. From top to toe. My lord, from head to foot. Then saw you not his face? Oh, yes, my lord. He wore his beaver up. What, looked he frowningly? A countenance more in sorrow than in anger. Pale or red? Nay, very pale. And fixed his eyes upon you? Most constantly. Would I have been there? It would have much amazed you. Very like. Stayed it long, while one with moderate haste might tell 100. Longer. Not when I saw it. His beard was grizzled. No? It was as I have seen it in his life, a sable, silvered. I will watch tonight, perchance 'twill walk again. I warrant it will. If it assume my noble father's person, I'll speak to it, though hell itself should gape and bid me hold my peace. I pray you all, if you have hitherto concealed this sight, let it be tenable in your silence still, and whatsoever else shall hap tonight, give it an understanding, but no tongue. I will requite your loves, so fare you well. Upon the platform, 'twixt 11 and 12, I'll visit you. Our duty to your honor. Your loves is mine to you. Farewell. My father's spirit in arms. All is not well. I doubt some foul play. When the night were come. Till then sit still my soul. Foul deeds will rise, though all the earth o'erwhelm them to men's eyes. And he exits. There we are. Horatio, who is the rational character in the play, has already seen the ghost, and now he doubts his own eyes. He doubts whether or not this has actually occurred, but it has been so apparent that it has occurred that he has a hard time doubting it. And now Hamlet himself, who has been raised, by the way, in the skepticism of Wittenberg College, because Wittenberg College, which was founded in the early 1500s, was itself a bastion of nominalism. Hamlet himself is disturbed by the idea that there's a ghost walking around at the castle at Elsinore. And if there is a ghost that automatically indicates that there must be an otherworldliness, that there must be another realm from which the ghost appears. Especially if the ghost is a real ghost and not just a figment of Hamlet's imagination. Now, much ink has been spilled over the idea of whether the ghost is Hamlet's own imagination or whether the ghost is real. I don't know whether I fall down in one camp or the other, but it does seem to be the case that other people see the ghost besides Hamlet. So we can conjecture within the course of the play itself that the ghost is a very real thing. And Hamlet, experiencing the ghost, has a huge indicator that there is another world. There's something else there beyond the material alone, and it has invaded into this world. And now he is faced with having to confront that otherworldliness, a sort of an almost apocalyptic or a biblical scene of his encountering this ghost and seeing what the ghost has to say to him. And I love at the beginning when Hamlet says that this world is an untended garden that goes to seed. Remember that passage just after Gertrude and Claudius have encouraged him to be cheerful, right? Don't go back to Wittenberg, but stay here. Well, why does Claudius want to keep him close? I think Claudius is afraid that Hamlet is going to try and usurp the throne, right? And so Claudius, there's that old maxim of keep your friends close and your enemies closer. I think Claudius wants to keep Hamlet very close, just in case Hamlet actually does intend to usurp the throne. But Hamlet himself is wrestling with this idea that the world is an untended garden. It is something which is material only, materialistic only. And he's got this idea, I think, from Wittenberg College originally, but now it's been confirmed by his going back and finding that not only has his father, his real father, been killed or dead or died or whatever, but that he now has a fake father, an uncle who has replaced his real father. And that new father is doing everything he can to say, hey, Hamlet, everything's okay. It's all cool. You and me are buddies. You know, there's almost an artificiality, I think, to Claudius at this opening. It's sort of like, Hamlet, peace be upon you. It doesn't work. Hamlet suggests at the very beginning here, oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt and thaw and resolve itself into a dew. It's this image of transformation. If our material self is bound up with the rest of the material world, then where are we, right? When our material self melts, dies, goes into the dirt, when it resolves into a dew, where are we? Where is the soul? Where is the self? Is the self connected to the brain? Is it connected to the heart? Is it connected to the spleen? And ancient biblical authors used to say that the locus of the seat of love was not the heart, it was rather the spleen. So when God probed man, he probed him in his spleen, right? Is our self connected with any piece of us? Is our self connected with the hand or with the arm or with the leg or with the torso or with the head? Where is the self? Is the self simply the eyes peering out and the brain registering? Where do we get that sense of self? And when the self dissolves, as Hamlet suggests in this speech here in Act 1, Scene 2, when the self dissolves, the body is returned to the earth. Where are we? I love that he suggests here that he wants that self, that sullied flesh, that dirty flesh that carries around baggage with it. He wants it to melt and then resolve itself into a dew, which again, that's science, right? That's the science of that age is looking at what the transformations from solid to liquid to gas. And Hamlet says, I wish that would occur. And then I could figure out what the self really is. Or he wishes that the everlasting God had not fixed his canon against self-slaughter. Because self-slaughter or murder of self or suicide is against the will of God. By the way, Andrew is making yet another appearance in the show. So in case you're wondering, I am paying royalties to Andrew. This also brings up the idea that the world is like an unweeded garden for Hamlet. As he says, it is an unweeded garden that grows to seed. It seems to suggest that when one buys into the idea of nominalism, the world becomes this unweeded garden. Chaos ensues. There is no plan. Everything just goes to seed and runs rampant. And then the thing that really galls him is that his mother, only 2 months dead, his father has been dead for 2 months, his mother has remarried his uncle, which indicates that there was some sort of a love affair before the death of his father. It's a very hasty marriage. As he says to Horatio later on, right, the funeral meets for furnish forth the bridal table. It's this very hasty thing that occurs. And Hamlet he's agonizing over the idea that women themselves are frail, that frailty, thy name is woman, that women are able to turn so quickly and marry again and fall in love again. And that has implications, I think, on a much deeper level. But it's certainly, there's a lot of scholarly writing about the Oedipal nature of this play, how Hamlet sees in his mother a betrayal and a love interest and someone who has married too hastily. I don't know what I make of that necessarily, but I do think that Gertrude's marrying of the new uncle does seem to indicate something symbolic. And I would suspect that the symbolism is the marriage of the Virgin Mary image, the marriage of the feminine with this false nominalist father figure of God. Our image of God is frequently connected to our image of our fathers. And if our real father has died, it's replaced by a false father, an uncle. If our image of the eternal as being a reality, that is realism, if it's replaced by nominalism, then we have an uncle rather than a father. And he goes on about how he is just distressed over remembering the fact that she would hang on his father. And now she hangs on his uncle. And how is he supposed to trust any woman after this? Ophelia, for instance, who loves him. How can any love be trustworthy, having seen his mother, who's supposed to give the example for him, turn so quickly from his father to his uncle? And then finally he ends up with this idea about how she herself, who has betrayed him, right, has become incestuous. But he can't say anything about it. Because, of course, there's the political element as well. The fact that Claudius now holds the reins of government. And if Hamlet is to express anything contrary to Claudius's rule, he'll be killed. So we have a rather precarious situation. I think it's a situation where, if we're to liken this to the nominalist-realist debate, the nominalists are winning, And if we express anything opposite to the nominalists, we'll be killed. Shakespeare seems to indicate in his text. How then are we to accept the idea that there's anything beyond this world? Isn't the world right? Isn't it winning? I mean, look at the fact that we have all these gadgets and that we have all this technology and we have all this surplus. We have more stuff than anybody else in previous generations. We live like kings. Isn't it right that there is no beyond? Isn't it right that there is no metaphysical world? Isn't it right that there's no God? To believe in such things seems foolishness. The world overwhelmingly seems to indicate that there is no deity. There is no afterlife. There is no soul. Go with it. Because then you can buy lots of crap, stuff, junk, material goods, and live luxuriously like a king, like nobody else has in previous history. But if you cling to these ideas that somehow virtue and honor and love and the afterlife and the soul and beauty and goodness are true, then you're going to be in constant opposition with a world that does not seek your good. Claudius. Why that name? Why is he named Claudius? For that matter, why is Hamlet named Hamlet? I mean, it means a little city, doesn't it? A little polis. Is every man a little polis? Well, thus ends our reading of Act 1, Scene 2. And I look forward to our reading of the next scene. So join me next time when we do read Act 1, Scene 3. Until then, I encourage you again to check out Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. I encourage you to check out the Shakespeare 2020 project. I encourage you to check out the History of the English Language podcast, and check out the Postmodern Jukebox. They got some great tunes. Great stuff to listen to, especially for kids like myself who grew up in the 80s and 90s, and to hear these tunes by Pearl Jam, for instance, done, or Creep, right, by Radiohead, done in versions that are jazz versions. It's really quite delightful, so I highly encourage you to check that out. Also, check out my Patreon page if you haven't already, because I certainly would appreciate it if you became my patron, and any donation that you are able to give would be appreciated by myself and by my family as well. And until we meet again, do stay safe, stay healthy. God bless you all. Take care.